I've been a long-standing member of the Labour Party for a number of years, and like so many of you, I'm very concerned about the proposals to drop Clause 4. For me, it was the very reason why I joined the Labour Party. We have been told we should have a full discussion on this issue. Well, this video is part of that contribution. Let's see what Clause 4 actually says.
To secure for the workers by hand or by brain the full fruits of their industry and the most equitable distribution thereof that may be possible upon the basis of the common ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange, and the best obtainable system of popular administration and control of each industry or service, generally to promote the political, social and economic emancipation of the people.
What are these proposed changes? One is to move the party towards the market economy. This document, Labour's Objects, says a competitive market economy with a strong industrial and wealth-generating base is in the public interest. Another is to emphasise the party's commitment to social justice, freedom, opportunity, equality, democracy and solidarity. Fine words. But can the market economy really deliver these things? Of course, that is the big question. And in order to find out the answer, we've spoken to a number of people, including economists, party members, trade unionists, Professor Noam Chomsky, young people who are interested in this issue, and even, from a business perspective, Bill Jameson of the Sunday Telegraph. I'm sure you'll be very surprised at some of the answers.
It's comical. The possibility that a market could lead to equality is not even worth discussing. And in the real world, market systems lead to and accelerate radical inequality. And indeed, it's worth pointing out that no one has ever been committed to a market for themselves. Market discipline is for someone else.
I've spent the last 5 or 6 years monitoring the GATT process. That's the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. That's the world trading rules. It's the rules of engagement in economics. And one of the awesome things about watching and lobbying and participating in that process is to see the huge power of the new barons of the world economy, the multinational companies. I mean, these companies are of huge proportions. Their decisions, what they want, their lobbying power has basically framed the whole direction for the early part of the 21st century. And these companies are basically getting what they want. They're saying cut back on the social wage, cut back on the capacity to pay for hospitals. We can move our factories, move our production wherever we like. We look upon the world as one world. They're the first global thinkers and global practitioners.
Market economy cannot guarantee to provide those things, and it's not its objective to do so. I mean, its first call is upon the profitability of the enterprise, and it will actually go out of business if it doesn't provide that profitability. There is a belief that a regulated private corporation can do that for you. You can insist upon its working conditions, the minimum wages, the pensions, etc. But I actually think that's not right either, because there's always a conflict between the regulator and the private company, and in many ways the regulator is unaccountable, is not democratically elected, is appointed for a long period, gets into a cozy relationship with the private company, and in addition has very, very limited powers. The powers that the regulator has is in terms of prices, profits. Cannot say this public service must be provided, cannot say this is the appropriate technology, the appropriate investment, the appropriate levels of employment, or the appropriate prices to charge for those in need.
There's an argument which is often put forward by people who oppose public ownership or common ownership. They say, well, the important thing is to control, we don't need to own. And yet the reality is, as any asset stripper or any private business person will tell you, is that you only really control when you own. So if you want a planned economy, if you wanted to plan and develop the economy in a socially coherent and progressive way, you must have a substantial proportion of that economy under common ownership, or different forms of common ownership. That's the only way you can have democratic social control.
in the coal industry, I mean, we have to look at the reserves that we've got. We've got over 1,000 years coal reserves in this country, and I take on board what we say about an energy programme. We must have an energy programme, and surely it's got to be based around the commodities that we have. The commodity that we have is coal. We do mine, deep mine coal cheaper than any other country in the world. Let's use it. And it has to be owned. If it's not owned by us, then obviously the incentive under private hands is to make money.
Well, I mean, the last thing that the railways needs is privatisation. What the railways been lacking is proper investment in order to keep that public service going. Railways, as everybody knows, do not make a profit. And it's unrealistic to think that they're going to make a profit and still serve the travelling public as well. And I think nowadays more people realise that the environmental costs of not having a properly funded rail system, not just for public travel but for freight as well, taking it off the roads, etc., etc. So there's a massive weight of evidence which leads to the conclusion that privatisation is going to be a disaster. That's why the railways were nationalised in 1948.
I started in the coal industry in 1942 under private ownership, and believe me, it was hard. You want to dock your cap, you want to be down the pit 5 minutes before 7, and you won't let up to 5 minutes and quarter of an hour after 7.
Recently, Wayne David, who is the leader of the Labour Party's group in the European Parliament, was quoted as saying the strategy of the leadership of the Labour group was all about making the Labour Party acceptable to the city and industry. And there's no doubt they're well-meaning about that, but the truth is Labour will only make itself acceptable to the city and industry by ditching its own people and their interests. We have to accept that there are fundamental differences of interest between the aspirations and needs of the people that Labour exists to support and develop and champion, and the interests of the City of London and the large corporations that dominate our economy, the large multinationals that dominate the British economy. And this economy is dominated by monopolies to an extent which is not matched by any other economy in the world of this type. Those companies have very different interests. They have their own priorities, their own interests, which are about maximization of profit on a global scale. They will open and close industries and open and close businesses in the light of their profit and loss account. That is something completely different from the interests of the British people and that section of the British people that Labour exists to represent. And there is no way that a Labour government will be able to advance and develop those interests, the interests of our people, if it's trying to kowtow to the interests of those monopolies and those companies that dominate the economy.
It is now far more easy for companies not only to move their capital out of the UK, but to move their plant as well. Plant is now as mobile as capital. So, you're talking about a situation where we have an incoming government with an agenda to raise, whether it's corporation tax or income tax, what is going to happen to your stock of plant and capital. Now, it's far easier to up sticks and move, far easier than it was in the 1970s.
Yeah, and as a matter of plain common sense, how can you have a system premised on the pursuit of private profit and saying that's going to be for the benefit of everyone? In plain common sense, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think that's why we've got to start talking about the democratic control of resources. And it goes right back to what Glyn says in a very, very practical way. You're talking about we've got the best miners in the world, we've got coal in the ground, and out here at the same time we've got pensioners who are having their electricity cut off. And what is missing to match that to that and put that together? Nothing other than democratic control of capital. And that just simply means ownership. That's the biggest, best expression of that. And what really annoys me is to try and say that that is backward looking. In fact, if we're having a world which is deregulation, where there's global communication, when profit can jump, when vast sums of money can jump from one continent to another in the blink of an eye, you know, it strikes me that the only way we're going to control that is actually by common ownership. And that doesn't have to be just one monolithic way. We've got to imagine, you know, creative ways of doing that. And to say that that is somehow backward and that we're dinosaurs simply flies in the face of all the empirical evidence right in front of our eyes.
Can the market economy provide full employment?
Irrespective of the efficiency with which the market economy allocates the resources that it does use. I mean, the major problem with the market economy is the resources that it does not use, the mass unemployment, the excess capacity, people without jobs, even though there are people in poverty. And one thing that a public sector can do is ensure that levels of investment, levels of employment, and other social and economic objectives are pursued.
I've applied for about at least 50 at the most.
And have you got letters of rejection from all of them?
I've even turned up to like interviews and that, and like I've turned up to interviews, and like they turn around and say that either they don't need any other people, or they ain't got any vacancies or something like that, or I've been told that I'm overqualified.
You get into a sort of routine where you sort of work hard to start off with to prove to them that you can do the job. Then once you've sort of guaranteed the job, they expect you to do the hours even more. I was sort of averaging some about 80, 90 hours a week.
You don't get no trade union because they don't introduce you to the trade union. Even if you got sacked, you have to take it there and then. And the thing is, I got sacked because this West Indian guy thought I was mucking about on my job, which I wasn't. And he said, "You're sacked. Get out. Go and get your stuff out the quarters. The quarters are like a rat hole, mate."
You are seeing more and more a drift towards either part-time work or work that's done on a sort of casual basis because the need for retaining large semi-skilled or unskilled labour forces are no longer there. The competitive pressure has really eaten into those. But there is a demand, more and more demand for part-time workers, casual shift workers who can come in and produce. It's almost like sort of, on-time manufacture.
I was a security guard back in Wales, which was my last job before I came to London. And I was sort of working, guarding an open cast mine in Aberdeen. And I was getting paid £1.20 an hour. And I had a dog with me, and the dog was getting £3 an hour. Just more than twice the rate I was getting. And I was sort of getting picked up after about 3, 4, 5, even 5 hours late. I wasn't getting paid for the extra 5 hours. And that was 7 days a week. I didn't have no time to rest. I'd go home, sleep for about 2 or 3 hours, and I'd straight back into work. And on a weekend, I'd be finishing work at 8 o'clock Saturday morning. I was back in work at 12 o'clock.
Adaptable and flexible.
The thing is, you got no rights when you work for different people. You can't have an holiday, you have to work. And the thing was, I was getting work down to the ground.
If we continue to try and attract, through the market economy, investment from foreign companies in this country by lowering our wages, then all that will lead to is competitive undercutting of our wages in other countries to try and attract that foreign investment. What we need in this country is investment, not lower wages or not the market economy. And what's very, very clear, given the nature of our economy, dominated by multinational corporations and by the financial imperatives of the city, that we're not going to get that.
And as different workforces are maybe competing against each other, as we've said earlier on, it's a downward spiral, So for the individual worker out there, it's a very dangerous concept. For the trade unions, of course, it's equally dangerous because, big business does not want to see effective trade unionism survive, which is why nowadays it's now legal to pay a worker more money simply by ripping up their union membership card than their colleague who stays in the union. That was a court case that came to light last year.
Can the market economy support the welfare state?
The actual quality of care and the range of services available to people is being drastically cut. And you get in situations where there aren't enough sheets on the bed that it's hard to get just a simple bar of soap, There's a situation where you're getting feeding patients on the ward because there aren't enough staff.
Everybody who has to use the National Health Service or who's got children at ordinary schools knows that the systems are desperately underfunded and collapsing. And we need the Labour Party to say we're going to make sure that that money is available. And we can't do it if we're afraid of upsetting people in the city. we're going to have social justice as an empty phrase unless we've got some real means of backing it up. I think the experience of Clinton in America shows that if you try and